when a billionaire heard a homeless girl singing at night. What he did next changed her life forever. A chance encounter in the darkness transformed two souls searching for meaning in different worlds. Maxwell Harrington never imagined that an angelic voice from a shadowy alley would lead him to Eliza, a homeless teenager with a gift so extraordinary it left him speechless. What happened next wasn't just a story of discovery, but a journey that would challenge everything Maxwell believed about success, purpose, and the true value of wealth. Maxwell Harrington had everything money could buy: a tech empire worth billions, mansions on 3 continents, and a fleet of supercars he barely drove. But behind the Forbes covers and charity galas, he suffered from crushing insomnia that no luxury mattress or sleeping pill could cure. Night after night, he walked the empty streets of the city, hoping exhaustion would eventually claim him. But on this particular night, something else captured his attention instead, a voice so pure, so hauntingly beautiful, it stopped him mid-stride. Who could possibly be singing like that at 3 a.m.? Maxwell whispered to himself. Following the ethereal sound down a narrow alley he'd passed 100 times before, but never entered. What he saw made his heart stop. Huddled against a brick wall, a young woman with tangled hair and tattered clothes sang quietly to herself, unaware of her audience. Her voice didn't just carry notes. It conveyed pain, longing, and a raw talent Maxwell had never encountered in all his years of attending exclusive performances by world-renowned artists. When she finally noticed his shadow, their eyes locked for just a moment. Hers wide with fear, his with disbelief, before she snatched up a worn backpack and disappeared into the labyrinth of back streets. But what Maxwell didn't know was that finding this mysterious singer would shatter everything he thought he understood about talent, privilege, and his own empty success. Maxwell couldn't sleep. Again. But this time, it wasn't the usual emptiness keeping him awake. It was that voice, that impossible, perfect voice echoing in his mind. "I have to find her," he muttered, pacing his penthouse as dawn broke over the city skyline. The rational part of his brain, the part that had built a tech empire worth billions, told him to forget it. She was just another homeless person with a sad story. The city was full of them. But he couldn't forget. Not her voice, not her eyes when she saw him, that flash of defiance before fear took over. For the next week, Maxwell returned to the alley every night, waiting hours in the darkness. His driver thought he'd lost his mind. His executive team noticed his distraction during meetings. Just working through a new project, he'd tell them with a practiced smile. By the 10th night, desperation had set in. Maxwell expanded his search, walking for miles through neighborhoods his security team had explicitly warned him to avoid. He spoke with other homeless people, slipping them hundreds to talk. Most took his money with suspicious glances. Some told stories that led nowhere. "You looking for Nightingale?" An old man with a weathered face finally offered on the 14th night. That's what some of us call her. Girl who sings when she thinks no one's listening. "Where can I find her?" Maxwell asked, trying to hide his eagerness. The old man shrugged. "Sometimes at St. Mary's Shelter on Thursdays. They do a hot meal program. But she doesn't trust nobody in suits, so..." He eyed Maxwell's cashmere coat worth more than most people's monthly salary. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. Maxwell dressed in jeans and a plain jacket, leaving his watch and signet ring at home. He waited across the street from St. Mary's, feeling strangely nervous. A man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. And then he saw her. Thinner than he remembered, her dark hair pulled back, standing at the edge of the line rather than in it. watching, always ready to run. Maxwell approached carefully, like she was a wild animal that might bolt. "I heard you singing," he said simply when he reached her. "The other night, in the alley." Her eyes narrowed with immediate suspicion. So it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." She laughed. A harsh sound, nothing like her singing. "What do you want? Because if it's what most men want, you can keep walking." "Just to talk," Maxwell said, suddenly aware of how strange this must seem to her. "I'm Maxwell." "I didn't ask," she replied, but didn't walk away. After a long moment, she added quietly, "Eliza." It wasn't much, but it was a start. What Maxwell didn't know was that this brief exchange was the easy part. What he was about to discover about Eliza's past would make him question whether he had any right to interfere in her life at all. The shelter's dining hall buzzed with conversation. But at their corner table, silence hung between Maxwell and Eliza like a wall. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the hollowness of her cheeks and the dark circles under her eyes. Maxwell noticed how she had positioned herself, back to the wall, facing both the main entrance and the kitchen doors. The posture of someone who had learned the hard way to never let her guard down. "So, are you going to tell me why a guy in $200 jeans is slumming it at a homeless shelter?" Eliza finally asked, pushing her empty plate away. Her eyes, Maxwell noticed, constantly scanned the room, the habit of someone always looking for exits, threats, opportunities. She had eaten quickly, but carefully, like someone who knew hunger intimately but refused to appear desperate. "These were $80, Maxwell lied, then immediately regretted it. The denim had been custom-made in Japan, but that wasn't the point. "Look, I heard you sing, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Your voice, it's extraordinary. I've attended performances at Carnegie Hall, the Sydney Opera House, La Scala, and I've never heard anything like what I heard in that alley." Eliza's face hardened, her fingers tightening around the plastic cup of water she hadn't touched. "I don't sing anymore. Not really. But that night was a mistake." She cut him off, her voice low but sharp. "Sometimes it just happens. When I think no one's listening, when I forget where I am for a minute." Something flickered across her face. Pain, memory, loss. Before the mask of indifference returned. Maxwell leaned forward, careful not to invade her space. What if people were listening? What if the right people heard you? A bitter laugh escaped her. Nothing like the pure, crystalline sound of her singing voice. Right. The fairy tale where the homeless girl gets discovered and becomes a star? I'm a little old for bedtime stories. She glanced toward a young woman entering the shelter, relaxing slightly when she recognized the newcomer. "Besides, I've met men who promised to make me a star before. Their studios always turned out to be bedrooms." The implication made Maxwell wince. "That's not what I'm offering." "No? Then what exactly are you offering?" Maxwell with no last name. Her gaze was challenging, assessing. "Because nobody gives something for nothing. That's the first rule of surviving out here." "How old are you?" Maxwell asked, changing tactics. 22. She answered too quickly, the lie practiced and smooth. "And I'm the Queen of England," Maxwell replied with a small smile. 19? Eliza's silence confirmed his guess, but her jaw tightened defensively. The revelation made Maxwell's stomach clench. She wasn't just homeless. She was barely an adult, still technically a teenager. "What happened to you, Eliza? How did you end up here?" He gestured vaguely at the shelter, at her worn clothes, at the life circumstances that had brought someone with her gift to this place. Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. That's not how this works. You don't get my life story because you bought me a shelter dinner. I don't know you. I don't know what you want. And my history isn't entertainment for rich guys having midlife crises. A volunteer approached with coffee, and Eliza fell silent immediately, her expression closing like a door slamming shut. Maxwell noticed how she subtly shifted away from the man, how her right hand disappeared beneath the table, likely gripping some form of protection. The volunteer smiled kindly, but moved on when neither accepted the coffee. Fair enough, Maxwell conceded when they were alone again. He pulled out a business card, plain, with just his name and number. He'd deliberately chosen one without his company logo or title. I run a foundation that helps young artists. No strings, no fairy tales. Just resources for people with talent. Eliza took the card reluctantly, studying the embossed lettering with suspicion. You didn't mention what you get out of this. Maxwell considered lying again, then decided against it. Something about Eliza made him want to offer at least a sliver of truth. The chance to hear you sing again, properly this time. She studied him with eyes too old for her face. I'll think about it. She tucked the card into her jacket pocket, a gesture that seemed casual, but Maxwell recognized as careful. That pocket likely contained everything of value she owned. That's all I'm asking, he replied, fighting the urge to press further. As they stood to leave, Maxwell noticed how Eliza kept a careful distance between them, how she positioned herself near the exit. He also noticed the slight limp she tried to hide, the way she favored her right ankle. Do you need medical attention? He asked quietly. For your leg? Her expression shuddered completely. I'm fine. The words came out clipped, defensive. The foundation has access to healthcare providers. No questions asked, no documentation required. I said I'm fine. Her voice left no room for argument. Thanks for the meal. And then she was gone, slipping out the door and into the evening shadows with practiced ease. Maxwell stood watching the empty doorway, wondering if he'd ever see her again. 3 days passed with no call. Maxwell found himself checking his phone obsessively during meetings, distracted by thoughts of where Eliza might be, whether she was safe, whether she had enough to eat. His executive assistant noticed his preoccupation, but knew better than to ask. Maxwell was in a board meeting, half listening to quarterly projections, when his private line rang, the one printed on the card he'd given Eliza. Excuse me, he said, rising abruptly and cutting off his CFO mid-sentence. I need to take this. Hello, he answered, stepping out of the conference room into the hallway, heart pounding inexplicably. That foundation you mentioned. Eliza's voice was quiet, almost inaudible. Does it have a shower I could use? There was a vulnerability in the question that made Maxwell's chest tighten. He could hear street noise in the background, the sound of a siren wailing in the distance. Of course, he replied, keeping his voice neutral, not wanting to scare her off with too much enthusiasm. And clean clothes, food, whatever you need. A long pause followed. No strings? She finally asked, her voice harder now, protective. No strings, Maxwell confirmed. Where are you? I can pick you up. Another pause. I'll meet you somewhere. Not where I am. Maxwell understood immediately. She wouldn't reveal where she was staying. Another survival tactic. There's a coffee shop called Grounded on 9th and Harrison. Do you know it? I can find it. 1 hour? Make it 2, she replied, then hung up. Maxwell found her waiting at the agreed spot, her backpack clutched tightly against her chest like a shield. She looked worse than she had at the shelter. A fresh bruise blooming on her cheekbone, her limp more pronounced, but her eyes were clear and alert, studying his car with suspicion when he pulled up. "You can put your bag in the trunk if you want," he offered after she reluctantly slid into the passenger seat. "It stays with me," she replied flatly, clutching it tighter. Maxwell nodded, understanding. Everything she owned was in that bag. She wouldn't let it out of her sight. He drove her himself to a small, unmarked building his foundation maintained for young people in transition, a place with private rooms, showers, and no questions asked. The security was excellent but unobtrusive. The staff trained to respect privacy while ensuring safety. "You can stay as long as you need," he explained, showing her a simple but clean room with its own bathroom. "There's a kitchen down the hall that's always stocked, and there's a music room downstairs if you want to use it." He pointed to the electronic key card on the nightstand. "This gets you in and out, day or night. No curfew." Eliza moved through the space cautiously, like someone entering a museum, afraid to touch anything, afraid it might not be real. Her suspicious gaze softened slightly as she took in the room, her own space, with a door that locked from the inside. She ran her fingers over the clean bedspread, tested the mattress with a gentle press. "There are new toiletries in the bathroom," Maxwell added, standing awkwardly by the door. "And the closet has some basic clothes. If they don't fit, Lisa at the front desk can help you get what you need." Eliza turned to face him, her expression a complex mixture of gratitude, suspicion, and something like shame. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nobody just helps people like me without wanting something." Maxwell paused at the doorway, considering his answer carefully. The practiced philanthropic response died on his lips. "Because talent like yours shouldn't be lost to the streets," he said finally. "And because I haven't cared about anything in a very long time." It was the most honest thing he'd said to anyone in years. The admission surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. Eliza studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, not agreement, exactly, but acknowledgement. "I'll stay tonight," she said. "After that, I'll decide." "Fair enough," Maxwell replied, stepping back into the hallway. "My number's by the phone if you need anything. Anything at all." He closed the door gently behind him, resisting the urge to say more, to push harder. Trust, he reminded himself, couldn't be rushed or forced, especially not with someone who had clearly learned the hard way that trust was dangerous. That night, passing the building on his way home, Maxwell heard it, the sound that had haunted him for weeks. Eliza was singing in the music room, her voice flowing through the partially open window into the night air. The melody was unfamiliar. Something original, perhaps, with words he couldn't quite make out. But the emotion in her voice was unmistakable. Longing, grief, and underneath it all, a defiant thread of hope. He didn't stop. Some moments weren't meant to be interrupted. But for the first time in months, when Maxwell reached his empty penthouse, he slept without pills or alcohol, the memory of her voice finally quieting his restless mind. What he didn't know was that Eliza had seen his car slow down and then continue on. She had been watching from the shadows of the music room, ready to stop singing, ready to run if necessary. And for the first time in years, she had sung knowing someone was listening, and chosen not to run. In her room later, Eliza carefully unpacked her backpack, laying out its meager contents on the clean bedspread. a tattered notebook filled with lyrics and melodies, a small photo in a cracked frame, a Swiss Army knife, a rolled pair of socks containing exactly $87.43. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a faded t-shirt, a small silver locket with the initials EMR engraved on the back. She held the locket for a long moment, then tucked it under her pillow before finally allowing herself the luxury of a hot shower. As the water washed away days of grime, Eliza leaned against the tile wall and closed her eyes, wondering if she was making another mistake by staying, by beginning to trust. But for tonight at least, she was safe. For tonight, she had walls and a door that locked. For tonight, she would allow herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, her voice might still matter to someone in this world. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, washing the city streets clean as both Eliza and Maxwell, separated by miles but connected by an invisible thread of music, finally found a moment's peace in their otherwise turbulent lives. A week passed. Maxwell found himself inventing reasons to visit the foundation building, always hoping to catch a glimpse of Eliza or hear her sing again. The staff reported that she kept to herself, emerging from her room mainly at night when fewer people were around. She used the music room frequently, but stopped the moment anyone entered. The kitchen staff noted she always took less food than offered, eating quickly and often wrapping portions to take back to her room. The habit of someone accustomed to not knowing when their next meal would come. Maxwell tried to maintain his distance, respecting her space while quietly ensuring she had everything she needed. He instructed the staff to make no special fuss over her, but to provide whatever she requested without question. Eliza, for her part, requested almost nothing beyond what was already offered. "She's different from our usual residents," Lisa, the program director, told Maxwell during one of his visits. "Most young people who come here are either terrified or defiant. She's watchful, like she's studying us as much as we're trying to help her." "Has she spoken about her background?" Maxwell asked, trying to sound casual. Lisa shook her head. "Not a word. But she's been helping Darius, that 17-year-old who came in last month, teaching him to read better. I walked in on them yesterday. She shut down immediately, like she was embarrassed to be caught doing something kind." The information warmed something in Maxwell's chest. Despite her circumstances, despite whatever had happened to her, Eliza was still reaching out to help others. It confirmed what he had sensed from the beginning. There was something extraordinary about her, beyond just her voice. On the 8th day, Maxwell arrived to find Lisa looking concerned at the front desk, her usually calm demeanor visibly disturbed. "What is it?" he asked immediately. "She's been in the music room for hours," Lisa whispered, glancing down the hallway. "But she's not singing, not playing, just sitting at the piano. I tried to check on her, but she asked to be left alone, rather forcefully." Lisa hesitated. Today's date seems to mean something to her. When she saw the calendar this morning at breakfast, something changed. She's been in there ever since. Maxwell nodded, a heaviness settling in his chest. Anniversaries could be brutal reminders of loss. He knew that all too well. "I'll check on her." He walked slowly down the hallway, his footsteps echoing against the polished floors. Through the glass panel in the door, he could see Eliza seated at the grand piano, her fingers hovering above the keys without touching them. Her posture spoke of exhaustion, of some invisible weight pressing down on her shoulders. A small photograph lay on the piano beside her, the one he had glimpsed among her few possessions that first night. He knocked gently before entering. "Mind if I join you?" Eliza looked up, her expression guarded but not hostile. Her eyes were rimmed with red, though she had clearly tried to hide any evidence of tears. "It's your building." "Actually, it belongs to the foundation. I just fund it," Maxwell replied, taking a seat on a nearby chair rather than beside her on the bench. He deliberately positioned himself where she could see him clearly, maintaining enough distance to avoid crowding her. "You've been staying. That's good." She shrugged, tracing a finger along the edge of the piano. "It's better than the alternatives." Her voice was raspy, as though she'd been silent for too long, or perhaps had been crying. "Have you been playing?" he asked, nodding toward the instrument. "No." The word came out sharper than perhaps she intended. After a pause, she added, "I don't play anymore. Just like I don't sing. Not really." Her hand moved to cover the photograph, a protective gesture. "But you have played before," Maxwell observed. It wasn't a question. He had noticed how her fingers positioned themselves naturally over the keys, how she sat with the correct posture despite her apparent reluctance. The calluses on her fingertips told their own story of years of practice. Eliza's mouth tightened. Another lifetime ago. She stared down at the keys, seeming to see something beyond them, memories, perhaps, or ghosts. Maxwell waited, sensing there was more she might say if given space. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with unspoken words. Outside, rain began to fall, a gentle patter against the windows that filled the room with soft, ambient noise. "My mother taught piano," she finally offered, her voice distant, as if coming from somewhere far away. "Started me when I was 4. Said I had perfect pitch and good hands." She flexed her fingers unconsciously, then curled them into fists. "Doesn't matter now." "Why not?" Her laugh was hollow, a sound devoid of humor. "Look at me, Maxwell. Look at my life. Do I seem like someone who belongs at a piano? Someone who deserves to make music?" The bitterness in her voice was palpable, a tangible thing filling the space between them. "Yes," he answered simply. "You do." Something flickered across her face. Pain, longing, a flash of the person she might have been in that other lifetime she'd mentioned. Then the walls came back up, her expression shuddering like windows before a storm. "Why are you really here?" she asked, changing the subject. "Checking up on your investment?" "You're not an investment," Maxwell replied, keeping his voice even despite the slight sting of her words. "And I was hoping to hear you sing again." "So you've said. But people like you don't build shelters and provide food and clothes just to hear street kids sing. What's the real agenda? What do you want from me?" Her eyes narrowed, searching his face for deception. "Because everyone wants something." Maxwell considered his answer carefully. The practiced philanthropic response he might give to donors or the press felt hollow in the face of her direct questioning. "I told you before, I haven't cared about anything in a long time. Your voice, it made me feel something. I can't explain it better than that." Eliza studied him, her gaze probing, searching for the lie she clearly expected to find. "You're rich, aren't you? Not just comfortable, but seriously wealthy." Maxwell nodded, seeing no point in denying what she had clearly deduced. "Yes. And unhappy," she continued, her assessment uncomfortably accurate. "Despite all that money, I can see it in your eyes. The same emptiness I see in mine when I look in a mirror. Happiness isn't something you can buy," Maxwell said quietly. "I learned that the hard way." He glanced down at his hands, at the faint scar across his left wrist that his expensive watch usually covered. Today he'd forgotten to wear it. "No kidding." Eliza's voice held no sympathy. Try being hungry and see how that philosophy holds up. Poverty isn't some noble condition that builds character. It's just pain and fear and constant grinding worry. Maxwell accepted the rebuke with a slight nod. Fair point. I didn't mean to romanticize either condition. They sat in silence again, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the windows, painting golden rectangles across the floor. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Car horns, distant sirens, the murmur of countless lives intersecting. I looked you up, Eliza finally said, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the closed piano lid. Maxwell Harrington, tech billionaire, philanthropist. The papers call you the reluctant tycoon because you avoid publicity. Founded Harrington Systems at 22. Revolutionized data security or something. Worth about $12 billion, according to Forbes. Maxwell tensed slightly, uncomfortable with her recitation of facts about his life. Does that change things? Should it? She countered. You're still a stranger offering help for reasons I don't fully understand. Your bank account doesn't make your intentions any clearer. I'm not expecting anything from you, Eliza. Everyone expects something, she replied. But the words held less conviction than before. As if she was repeating a mantra she was beginning to question. She turned toward the piano again, her fingers finally making contact with the keys, but not pressing them. My mother had a Steinway. Not as nice as this one, but close. She saved for years to buy it, gave piano lessons in our living room to afford it. Maxwell remained silent, afraid to break whatever spell had loosened her tongue. The photograph peeked out from beneath her hand, a woman with Eliza's same dark hair and high cheekbones, smiling next to a younger, happier version of Eliza at a piano. She died when I was 14. Eliza continued, her voice detached, as if reciting someone else's story. Cancer. It was quick, at least. That was a mercy, the doctors said. As if watching your mother disappear in 3 months is something to be grateful for. Her eyes remained fixed on the keys. My father had left years before. There was an aunt who took me in, but she had her own problems. Addiction. Men. The usual story. Her fingers pressed down silently on the keys, forming chords only she could hear. By 16, I was on my own. The piano got sold to pay medical bills. End of music lessons. End of childhood. End of everything that mattered. But not the end of your voice, Maxwell observed softly. Eliza's hand stilled. No, not that. Though God knows I've tried to silence it sometimes. She glanced up, a flash of defiance in her eyes. Do you know what it's like to have something inside you that won't stay buried? That keeps resurfacing no matter how hard you try to drown it? The question struck uncomfortably close to Maxwell's own demons. Yes, he admitted. I do. Something passed between them then. A moment of recognition, of seeing and being seen. Why would you want to silence your voice? Maxwell asked after a moment. She looked at him then, really looked at him, her eyes clear and direct for the first time. Because it hurts to have a gift you can't use, to know what you could have been in another life, to sing into emptiness, knowing no one who matters will ever hear you. Her voice caught slightly. And because it was hers, my mother's gift to me. Using it reminds me of her. Not using it feels like betraying her. Either way, it hurts. The raw honesty of her words struck Maxwell like a physical blow. Before he could respond, Eliza stood abruptly, gathering the photograph and tucking it into her pocket. I should go. I've taken up enough of your charity. It's not charity, Maxwell protested, standing as well. And you don't have to go. The foundation— I know what the foundation offers, she interrupted, and I'm grateful. But I can't stay here forever, living in some fantasy world where billionaires rescue street singers. That's not how life works. Not for people like me. What if it's not a fantasy? The words escaped before Maxwell could consider them. What if there's a way to use your gift, to build the life you should have had? Eliza's expression hardened. I don't need saving, Maxwell. I'm not a project for you to fix to make yourself feel better about your empty mansion and meaningless billions. The accuracy of her assessment stunned him into momentary silence. It was precisely what his ex-wife had said during their final argument. That he collected causes to fill the void inside himself. That his philanthropy was just another form of acquisition. I'm sorry, Eliza said, softer now, perhaps seeing the impact of her words. That was unfair. You've been kind, and I'm not good at accepting kindness anymore. It feels too much like a trap. No apology needed, Maxwell replied, finding his voice again. You're not wrong about me. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of discomfort from a man usually so composed. I do want to help you. And yes, maybe that desire isn't entirely selfless. Maybe I am looking for meaning. But that doesn't make your talent any less real or your situation any less unjust. Something shifted between them in that moment. A mutual recognition, perhaps, of the broken places they each carried. The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the windows, creating a cocoon of sound around them. Play something, Maxwell said suddenly. Just one piece. For yourself, not for me. I'll leave if you want me to. Eliza hesitated, her body tense with indecision. Her hand moved to her pocket where she'd placed the photograph, as if drawing strength from it. Then, slowly, she sat back down at the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a long moment before descending. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the room, halting at first, then with growing confidence. Maxwell recognized the piece immediately. His mother had played it often during his childhood, before the family fortune, before everything changed, before she too had left, though in a different way than Eliza's mother. He closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. Eliza played with technical imperfection but emotional precision, each note carrying years of unspoken grief, of talents suppressed, of dreams deferred. There were mistakes, moments where her fingers stumbled over passages that had once been familiar, but the emotion behind the playing transcended any technical flaws. As she played, Maxwell observed the transformation in her posture, in her entire being. The guardedness melted away, replaced by a total immersion in the music. This, he realized, was the real Eliza. The person behind the walls, behind the survival mechanisms and distrust. This was who she had been meant to be before life intervened. When the final notes faded, neither spoke. The silence that followed felt sacred somehow, a moment outside of time. Eliza's hands remained on the keys, as if reluctant to break contact with the instrument. My mother loved Chopin, she finally said, her voice barely audible above the sound of the rain. She said his music was like speaking directly to the soul. She was right, Maxwell replied simply. Today would have been her birthday, Eliza added, the words coming out in a rush, as if she needed to say them aloud to someone. 45, not even old. She closed the piano lid gently, her fingers lingering on the polished wood. I always played this piece for her on her birthday, even after she got sick, even when she was too weak to sit up. I'd wheel the piano into her hospital room. Maxwell felt a tightness in his throat. She would be proud of how you played it just now. Eliza shook her head slightly. I'm out of practice. It used to be better. It was beautiful, Maxwell insisted. Technical perfection isn't what makes music meaningful. She looked up at him, a hint of surprise in her expression, as if she hadn't expected him to understand. That's what she used to say. She stood, smoothing down her shirt in a self-conscious gesture. I should go. Where? The question was direct, without judgment. She shrugged. I have places. I'll be fine. Stay, Maxwell said. Not forever. Just until you figure out what you want to do next. Use the music room, play the piano, sing, or don't. No expectations. Eliza studied him, searching for hidden motives. The wariness had returned to her eyes, but it was tempered now with something else. A cautious consideration. Why does it matter to you? Really? Maxwell considered lying, considered offering some philanthropic platitude about potential and opportunity. Instead, he chose the truth. Because your music made me feel alive again. And I think maybe you need to feel alive again, too. Something in his words seemed to reach her. After a long moment, she nodded once. I'll stay. For now. She glanced toward the window, at the rain streaming down the glass. At least until the weather clears. The room is yours for as long as you want it, Maxwell assured her. No time limit. Eliza nodded again, though the reservation in her expression suggested she didn't quite believe him. Years of broken promises and disappointments had taught her not to trust in permanence. I have a meeting I need to get to, Maxwell said, sensing she needed space. But I'd like to talk more when you're ready. About what? The wariness returned to her voice. About possibilities, he replied simply. No pressure, just possibilities. He left her there in the music room, the sound of the rain creating a gentle backdrop to the silence between them. As he walked down the hallway, he heard it, the soft beginning of another piece. Not Chopin this time, but something he didn't recognize. Something original, perhaps. As Maxwell left the building that evening, he realized something had fundamentally shifted. He had entered the music room hoping to hear Eliza sing again, to recapture the feeling her voice had given him that night in the alley. Instead, he had glimpsed the person behind the voice, with all her jagged edges and carefully guarded wounds. And somehow, that glimpse had affected him even more deeply than her singing. In his car, he made a call to his executive assistant. Cancel my meetings for the rest of the week, he instructed. And get me everything you can find on music therapy programs, especially for at-risk youth. Also, I need information on GED programs and college applications for someone with no formal high school record. May I ask what this is about? His assistant inquired, used to his occasional impulsive projects, but clearly surprised by this particular direction. It's about possibilities, Maxwell replied, echoing the word he'd used with Eliza. And second chances. What he didn't know was that after he left, Eliza remained at the piano for hours. At first, she simply played. Rusty at first, then with increasing fluidity as muscle memory awakened. Pieces her mother had taught her emerged from her fingers like old friends returning after a long absence. Beethoven, Mozart, Bach, the classical foundations of her childhood. Then, as evening deepened into night, she began experimenting with her own compositions, melodies that had lived only in her head for years, finding their way out through her fingers onto the keys. And finally, near midnight, She began to sing, her voice joining with the piano in a melody of her own creation. In her song were questions without answers, pain without resolution. There was anger there, at her mother's death, at her father's abandonment, at a world that had left her to fend for herself when she was still a child. But there was also something new emerging, a fragile, tentative hope that perhaps her voice might still find its way out of the darkness after all. In the room she'd been given, Eliza had placed her mother's photograph on the nightstand. The first time in years she had felt safe enough to display it, rather than keep it hidden away. Next to it lay the silver locket with her initials, EMR. Eliza Marie Reynolds, a 16th birthday gift from her mother, just weeks before the diagnosis that would change everything. As she finally returned to her room in the early hours of the morning, fingers aching pleasantly from hours of playing, throat raw from singing, Eliza touched the photograph gently. "I played for you today, Mom," she whispered. I remembered how. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city glistened under streetlights, washed clean, as if ready for a new beginning. Eliza stood at the window for a long moment, looking out at a world that had been cruel to her, but that still, somehow, contained beauty, contained music. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder what might come next. Not with naive optimism, she had seen too much for that, but with a cautious openness to the possibility that her story might not be finished after all. Several miles away, in his penthouse overlooking the same city, Maxwell Harrington sat at his desk, surrounded by research on music education programs, scholarship opportunities, and recording studio contacts. On his computer screen was a half-written proposal for a new foundation initiative focused on musical education for homeless youth. He worked through the night, driven by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The emptiness that had become his constant companion seemed less overwhelming somehow, pushed back by the memory of Chopin's nocturne played by hands that remembered beauty despite everything they had endured. Neither Eliza nor Maxwell slept that night. Both were too busy remembering what it felt like to care deeply about something, to feel the stirring of possibility after too long in the dark. Their paths had crossed by chance, but what would grow from that intersection was beginning to feel less like chance and more like something neither of them had believed in for a very long time. Destiny. 3 weeks after Eliza first played Chopin's nocturne in the music room, Maxwell arrived at the foundation building with a proposal. He found her in what had become her usual spot, seated at the piano, a notebook open beside her, pencil tucked behind her ear as she worked through a composition of her own creation. The staff had reported a gradual transformation in Eliza over these weeks. She still kept mostly to herself, but the wariness in her eyes had softened. She had begun taking meals in the common area occasionally, rather than always retreating to her room. Most significantly, she had started working with some of the younger residents, offering informal music lessons to anyone interested. Maxwell paused in the doorway, reluctant to interrupt. Eliza was completely absorbed in her work, humming softly as her fingers tested a sequence of chords. The intensity of her concentration, the slight furrow between her brows as she considered a particular passage, these were the signs of someone reconnecting with their passion. She sensed his presence before he spoke, looking up with less alarm than she might have shown weeks earlier. "How long have you been standing there?" "Not long," Maxwell replied, stepping into the room. "You're composing." It wasn't a question, but Eliza nodded anyway. "Just playing around with some ideas." She closed the notebook partially, not hiding it completely, but clearly protective of her work. "Lisa said you wanted to see me." Maxwell took a seat across from her, placing a leather portfolio on the table between them. I have something I'd like to discuss with you. A proposition. Immediately, her posture changed. Spine straightening, shoulders tensing, the openness in her expression replaced by caution. What kind of proposition? Maxwell recognized the shift, mentally cursing himself for his poor choice of words. Not what you're thinking. It's about your music. Eliza relaxed slightly, though the wariness remained. What about it? I've been doing some research, Maxwell began, choosing his words carefully. There's a program at Westridge Conservatory. It's designed for musicians who've had unconventional paths. No traditional academic requirements, just raw talent and potential. A conservatory, Eliza repeated, her voice flat. You want me to go to school? I want you to consider it, Maxwell corrected gently. The program includes housing, meals, a stipend for living expenses. Everything would be covered by a foundation scholarship. Your foundation, Eliza stated. Maxwell nodded. Yes, but the selection would be made by the conservatory faculty based on auditions. I wouldn't influence the decision. Eliza was silent for a long moment, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the closed notebook. Why are you doing this? Because you have extraordinary talent that deserves to be developed, Maxwell replied. And because everyone deserves a chance to become who they were meant to be. A bitter laugh escaped her. And you think I was meant to be a musician? Based on what? Hearing me sing once in an alley? Based on watching you these past weeks, Maxwell said quietly. The way you come alive when you play. The way you've been helping the younger residents here. The compositions in that notebook you're trying to hide from me. Eliza's hand stilled on the notebook. You've been watching me. Not in a creepy way, Maxwell assured her. The staff keeps me updated on all residents. But yes, I've been particularly interested in your progress. Because I'm your project, she said, an edge returning to her voice. Because you're extraordinary, Maxwell countered. And because I believe you could have a real future in music if given the opportunity. Eliza stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, early spring sunshine illuminated the courtyard, where some of the younger residents were playing basketball. I'm 19, with no high school diploma, no permanent address, and a 3-year gap in my musical education. Conservatories don't accept people like me. This one might, Maxwell said, if you're willing to audition. She turned to face him, arms crossed protectively across her chest. And if they don't? What then? Then we find another path, Maxwell replied simply. There are other programs, other opportunities. This isn't the only option, just the one I think might be the best fit. We, Eliza repeated, focusing on the pronoun. You keep saying we like we're partners in this, like you have some stake in what happens to me. Maxwell met her gaze steadily. Maybe I do. Why? The question was direct, demanding. Maxwell considered his answer carefully. Because helping you find your way back to music has given me purpose. Because watching you reconnect with your talent has been the most meaningful thing I've done in years. He paused. And because I think we've both been lost in different ways. Maybe finding your path will help me find mine. The honesty in his response seemed to catch Eliza off guard. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You're a strange billionaire, Maxwell Harrington. A smile tugged at his lips. So I've been told. Eliza returned to her seat, pulling the notebook closer to her. When would this audition be? 2 weeks from now? Maxwell replied, trying to keep the hope from his voice. The new term starts in June. She nodded slowly, considering. And if I said yes, if I actually got accepted, what would you expect in return? Nothing, Maxwell said firmly. This isn't a transaction. The scholarship comes with no strings attached. Eliza's eyes narrowed skeptically. Everyone wants something. Not this time, Maxwell insisted. Your success would be enough. She was silent again, her fingers drumming lightly on the notebook. Finally, she asked, what would I need to prepare for this audition? Maxwell felt a surge of hope, but kept his expression neutral. 2 contrasting pieces that showcase your abilities, and they'd want to hear you sing as well. Eliza nodded again, more decisively this time. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking, Maxwell replied, standing to leave. He placed a card on the table. The program director's information. If you decide to audition, you can contact her directly. I've already spoken to her about the scholarship, but I haven't mentioned you specifically. This would be entirely your initiative. As he reached the door, Eliza's voice stopped him. Maxwell? He turned. Yes? Thank you, she said simply, for believing there might be a path forward. There is, he replied with certainty. Whether it's this one or another, there's a path forward for you, Eliza. I'm just trying to help clear away some of the obstacles. After he left, Eliza sat for a long time, staring at the program director's card. Then, slowly, she opened her notebook again and began to play. Not one of her compositions, but a Bach prelude her mother had taught her years ago. Her fingers remembered the patterns, muscle memory awakening after its long dormancy. As the familiar notes filled the room, Eliza allowed herself, just for a moment, to imagine a different future than the one she had resigned herself to. A future where her music might matter, where her voice might be heard. It was a dangerous thing, hope. But for the first time in years, she found herself willing to risk it. What she didn't know was that Maxwell, sitting in his car outside the foundation building, was experiencing a similar awakening. The emptiness that had driven him to walk the city streets at night, that had led him to that particular alley at that particular moment, was receding, replaced by a sense of purpose he had thought lost forever. In helping Eliza find her way back to music, he was finding his way back to himself. 2 paths that had crossed by chance were now running parallel, leading them both towards something neither had dared to imagine. Redemption. The Westridge Conservatory stood like a fortress of artistic aspiration, all Gothic spires and ivy-covered stone. Its imposing facade softened only by the music that drifted through open windows on the warm May afternoon. Eliza stood at the wrought iron gates, her second-hand dress smoothed nervously under trembling fingers, a folder of sheet music clutched against her chest like armor. We can still turn around, Maxwell said quietly beside her. He had offered to drive her, but had been careful to add that she could go alone if she preferred. To his surprise, she had accepted his company. No, Eliza replied, her voice steadier than her hands. I need to do this. She took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. Even if they laugh me out of the audition room. They won't, Maxwell assured her. They're looking for talent, not pedigree. Eliza shot him a skeptical glance, but said nothing. Over the past 2 weeks, she had prepared with an intensity that had both impressed and concerned the foundation staff. Hours upon hours at the piano, working through technical exercises to rebuild the skills that had atrophied during her years on the streets. Her voice, always extraordinary, had grown stronger and more controlled with each day of practice. But it was the emotional transformation that had been most remarkable. The protective shell she had built around herself had begun to crack, allowing glimpses of the person she might have been without the trauma of her past. Passionate, determined, occasionally even playful. She still kept her distance from most people, still retreated when conversations became too personal, but the wall between her and the world was no longer impenetrable. "You don't have to wait," she told Maxwell as they walked up the tree-lined path toward the main building. Students lounged on the manicured lawns, instrument cases beside them, the casual privilege of their surroundings evident in their relaxed postures. Eliza's steps slowed as she observed them, the gulf between their lives and hers suddenly, painfully apparent. "I don't mind waiting," Maxwell replied. "Unless you'd prefer I didn't." Eliza shook her head slightly. "No, it's fine. She broke off, her attention caught by the sound of a violin from a nearby practice room. The notes floated through an open window, hauntingly beautiful. "I don't belong here," she whispered, so quietly Maxwell almost missed it. "Let them decide that," he said gently. They reached the imposing oak doors of the administration building, where a sign directed scholarship audition candidates to the 3rd floor. Inside, the hallways gleamed with polished marble, the walls adorned with portraits of distinguished alumni and benefactors. Eliza's footsteps faltered again as they passed a practice room where a young man was playing a Rachmaninoff concerto with effortless technical precision. "They've been training their whole lives," she murmured, more to herself than to Maxwell. "I haven't touched a piano in 3 years before coming to the foundation." "Music isn't just about technical perfection," Maxwell reminded her. "It's about what you bring to it, your perspective, your emotion, your life experience." Eliza's laugh held no humor. "My life experience isn't exactly what they're looking for in these hallowed halls." "You might be surprised," a voice interrupted from behind them. They turned to find a woman in her 60s, silver hair swept into an elegant knot, her posture as straight as if she still performed on the concert stages that had made her famous decades ago. Maxwell recognized her immediately from the conservatory website. Dr. Eleanor Winters, program director and former concert pianist of international renown. "Dr. Winters," Maxwell acknowledged with a nod. "I'm Maxwell Harrington. We spoke on the phone about the foundation scholarship." "Of course," Dr. Winters replied, her keen eyes moving from Maxwell to Eliza. "And you must be Ms. Reynolds." Eliza nodded, her knuckles white around the folder of music. "You're early," Dr. Winters observed, glancing at an elegant watch. "That's good. It gives you time to warm up. Practice room 4 is available." She gestured down the hallway. "The piano is a Steinway, not our best, but solid." "Thank you," Eliza managed, her voice barely audible. Dr. Winters studied her for a moment, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Nervous?" Eliza gave a short, jerky nod. "Good," Dr. Winters said, surprising them both. "Nervousness means you care. Channel it into your performance." She checked her watch again. "Your audition is in 45 minutes. Room 312. The committee will be myself and 2 other faculty members." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mr. Harrington mentioned you've had an unconventional path. We're interested in your music, Ms. Reynolds, not your biography. Play what speaks to you, not what you think we want to hear." With that, she disappeared down the hallway, leaving Eliza staring after her. "See?" Maxwell said softly. "Not about pedigree." Eliza took a shaky breath. "I need to warm up." "I'll wait out here," Maxwell offered, gesturing to a bench in the hallway. Eliza nodded distractedly, already moving toward practice room 4, her mind clearly shifting to the music ahead. Maxwell watched her go, struck by how different she looked from the wary young woman he had first encountered at the shelter. The second-hand dress, purchased with foundation funds but chosen by Eliza herself, was simple but elegant, dark blue against her pale skin. She had pulled her hair back, revealing the fine bones of her face. But it was more than her appearance. It was the way she carried herself now, with purpose, rather than mere survival. For 40 minutes, Maxwell sat on the bench outside the practice room, listening as Eliza worked through her audition pieces. First came the Bach, technically demanding but executed with growing confidence. Then Chopin, the nocturne she had played that day in the music room, now refined and polished. Finally, her own composition, a piece she had been reluctant to share but that Dr. Winters had specifically requested after hearing about Eliza's creative work. As the time for the audition approached, the music stopped. The door opened and Eliza emerged, her face pale but composed. "Ready?" Maxwell asked, standing. "No," Eliza replied honestly, "but I'm going to do it anyway." They walked together to room 312, where Dr. Winters and 2 colleagues, a stern-looking man in his 50s and a younger woman with kind eyes, sat behind a table. A magnificent grand piano dominated the center of the room. "Ms. Reynolds," Dr. Winters greeted her. "This is Professor Abernathy, our department chair, and Dr. Chen, who leads our vocal program." She gestured to the piano. "Whenever you're ready." Maxwell gave Eliza's arm a gentle, encouraging squeeze before taking a seat against the wall. She approached the piano, placing her music on the stand, then hesitated. "I'd like to begin with Bach," she said, her voice steadier than Maxwell had expected. "Prelude and Fugue in C minor, from the Well-Tempered Clavier." Dr. Winters nodded, making a note on her clipboard. Eliza sat adjusting the bench, then placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes, centering herself. Then she began to play. The Bach flowed from her fingers with technical precision that belied her years away from formal training. But it was more than technically correct. There was an intensity to her interpretation, a depth of feeling that transformed the academic exercise into something profoundly human. Maxwell watched the committee's faces, noting how Professor Abernathy's stern expression gradually softened, how Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly, caught by the performance. When the Bach concluded, Eliza moved without pause into the Chopin, the nocturne that had first revealed her soul to Maxwell. Her body swayed slightly with the music, completely absorbed in the emotional landscape of the piece. The room seemed to disappear. Around her, the committee forgotten as she communed directly with the composer across centuries. As the final notes of the Chopin faded, Dr. Winters made another note on her clipboard. "And now, your original composition, please." Eliza hesitated, her hands hovering above the keys. It's not finished," she admitted, "and it's meant to be accompanied by voice." "Then sing it," Dr. Chen encouraged, speaking for the first time. "We'd like to hear your voice as well." Eliza nodded, took a deep breath, and began. The composition started simply, a melancholy melody in a minor key, supported by sparse, haunting chords. But as it progressed, it evolved, gathering complexity and emotional intensity. When she began to sing, the effect was transformative. The lyrics spoke of loss and survival, of darkness and the stubborn persistence of light. Her voice carried the raw emotion of someone who had lived every word, who had found a way to transmute pain into art. Maxwell felt a tightness in his throat as he watched the committee's reactions. Dr. Winters completely still. Professor Abernathy with eyes closed in concentration. Dr. Chen leaning forward with undisguised wonder. When Eliza finished, silence filled the room. Not the awkward silence of disappointment, but the reverent silence that follows a moment of genuine artistic communion. Maxwell found himself holding his breath, waiting. Dr. Winters was the first to speak. "Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. That was illuminating." Her professional demeanor remained intact, but something in her eyes had softened. "Would you mind waiting outside for a few minutes while we confer?" Eliza nodded, rising from the piano bench with careful dignity. As she passed Maxwell, he gave her an encouraging smile, which she returned, tentatively but genuinely. In the hallway, Eliza paced nervously. "I messed up the third measure of the Bach," she murmured, "and the bridge in my piece isn't right yet. It needs work." "Eliza," Maxwell interrupted gently, "you were extraordinary." She stopped pacing, looking at him with vulnerable hope. "Really?" "Really," he confirmed. "I've attended concerts all over the world, and I've never heard anything more moving than what you just played in there." Before Eliza could respond, the door opened, and Dr. Winters emerged. "Ms. Reynolds, we'd like to speak with you again." Eliza shot a nervous glance at Maxwell before following Dr. Winters back into the room. The door closed behind them, leaving Maxwell alone in the hallway, heart pounding with anticipation. 10 minutes later, though it felt like hours, the door opened again. Eliza emerged, her expression unreadable. "Well?" Maxwell asked, unable to contain his curiosity. A smile broke across Eliza's face, tentative at first, then radiant. "I'm in," she whispered, as if saying it too loudly might make it untrue. "They offered me the scholarship, full tuition, housing, everything." Maxwell felt a surge of joy so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. "Eliza, that's wonderful. There's more," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "Dr. Chen wants to work with me specifically on vocal composition, and Dr. Winters—" She broke off, shaking her head in disbelief. "Dr. Winters said my original piece showed extraordinary promise. She wants me to develop it into a full song cycle for the fall student showcase." "Of course she does," Maxwell replied, not bothering to hide his pride. "Because it's brilliant. Because you're brilliant." Eliza's smile faltered slightly. "I still can't quite believe it's real. That I'm actually going to be a student here. That I have a chance to—" She gestured vaguely, struggling to articulate the magnitude of the opportunity. "A chance to become who you were always meant to be," Maxwell finished for her. She nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing this was possible when I didn't." "You did all the work," Maxwell reminded her. "I just opened a door. You walked through it on your own merit." As they left the conservatory, Eliza paused on the steps, looking back at the imposing building that would soon become her academic home. "I never thought I'd have a future again," she said quietly. "After my mother died, after everything that happened, I thought that part of my life was over." "And now?" Maxwell asked. Eliza turned to him, the afternoon sunlight illuminating her face. No longer the guarded, wary face of a survivor, but the hopeful, determined face of someone with purpose. "Now I have to figure out what to do with it." In the car driving back to the foundation building, Eliza was uncharacteristically talkative, her mind racing with possibilities, with plans, with the sudden expansion of her horizon beyond mere survival. Maxwell listened, offering occasional comments, but mostly content to witness this transformation, this rebirth. What neither of them articulated, what hovered unspoken between them, was the question of what would happen to their unlikely friendship once Eliza began her new life at the conservatory. Maxwell had opened a door for her, had helped clear her path. But would there still be a place for him in the life she was about to build? As they pulled up to the foundation building, Eliza turned to him, suddenly serious. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," Maxwell assured her. "Seeing you reclaim your talent is thanks enough." Eliza shook her head. "No, it's more than that. You saw me when I was invisible. You heard me when no one was listening." She hesitated, then added, "I don't want to disappoint you." "You couldn't," Maxwell said firmly. "Whatever path you take from here, whatever you choose to do with your music, it's your journey now. I'm just grateful to have witnessed the beginning of it." Eliza studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth behind his words. Then, in a gesture that surprised them both, she leaned across the car and hugged him briefly but fiercely. "I'll make it count," she promised as she pulled away. "This chance, I won't waste it." "I know you won't," Maxwell replied, his voice rougher than he intended. He watched as she walked into the building, her steps lighter than he had ever seen them, her future stretching before her like an unwritten symphony, full of possibility, of challenge, of hope. In that moment, Maxwell realized that in helping Eliza find her way back to music, he had found something he had thought lost forever. The capacity to care deeply about something beyond himself. The emptiness that had driven him to walk the city streets at night, that had led him to that particular alley at that particular moment, had been filled with purpose, with meaning. It wasn't just Eliza who had been given a second chance. It was both of them. As he drove away, Maxwell found himself humming the melody of Eliza's original composition, a melody that spoke of survival and transformation, of darkness and the stubborn persistence of light. A melody that would continue to evolve and grow, just as its creator would. A melody that had, in its own way, saved them both.